the economic problems we have, they are mainly based on wrong political decisions, you can say.
Okay.
And China is still today a huge market. Not only for Europe, but also for any other bigger economy in the world.
Germany's always been a foot in and a foot out.
India can be a hub for defense manufacturing.
Germany, Europe's largest economy, is grappling with a series of crises, political, economic, and security related. Chancellor Scholz's ruling coalition has collapsed. GDP has stagnated for the last 5 years, and the country's security apparatus is under immense strain due to the war in Ukraine. Germany faces the daunting challenge of diversifying its energy sources away from Russia, reducing economic dependence on China, supporting Ukraine, and simultaneously modernizing its own defense. And all of this at once, making it an almost insurmountable challenge. Is there hope on the horizon, or will these challenges persist? From India's perspective, Germany is not only its largest trading partner in Europe, but also a key defense collaborator now, recently sealing a deal for AIP-propelled conventional submarines. However, despite Germany's push to de-risk from China, this has yet to translate into significant German investments in India, though the long-term outlook remains positive. Who will form the next government? What economic policies will they pursue? How will Germany navigate its approach towards Ukraine and Russia? And what role will it play in the Indo-Pacific? To unpack these critical questions and the broader implications of Zeitenwende, or Germany's new era, I am joined by two distinguished guests. From New Delhi, we have Dr. Adrian Haack, India Director at the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, a prominent German political foundation. And from Berlin, we are joined by Jan St. Pierre, CEO of MOSECON, a well-known geopolitical risk consultancy. So very happy to be joined by the both of you. And so today, like I said, that we are going to be discussing about the various problems that are ailing Germany. From India's perspective, it is a very, very relevant discussion to have because Germany is not only India's largest trading relationship in Europe, but also, now with all the push for the Indo-Pacific and all, India and Focus document was recently released by the outgoing government now because there's a political crisis. I mean, of course, this is a relationship that we must be focusing more on. Now, first things first, what we are trying to here understand in India is that everything seemed okay in Germany about, say, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, right? Or is that, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but things seemed okay. And suddenly we see that there is Murphy's Law in Germany. Whatever could go wrong has gone wrong. There is a political crisis. There are going to be new elections now. The traffic light coalition of Chancellor Scholz, Chancellor Scholz is from the Social Democrats, and then he was in coalition with two other political parties. All three were looking at different directions and had a different worldview. That has collapsed. Now elections are, I think, closer than a month, if I'm not wrong. So that's one part. There's political crisis. There's also economic crisis because for the last 5 years, the German GDP has not been growing. In fact, I think very, very somehow you've been able to manage to avoid recession, right? What has gone wrong? Where is the Zeitenwende that everybody was talking about? First, I'll ask this question to you, Adrian, and then maybe I'll come to Jan.
Yeah, it's interesting how you asked the question because you divided it into two crises, a political one and an economic one. Yeah. But from my perspective, they are just the same. Mm-hmm. Okay. And Germany had, like every country, several problems in the past. But you mentioned 3 years ago, and that was exactly the time when Angela Merkel left the stage. Uh-huh. She was ruling Germany for 16 years, and the political system as a whole was not able to manage that vacuum. So we can say the elections we had in 2021, they were a complete accident. Okay. So this traffic light coalition was right from the beginning dysfunctional. And it is a kind of a wonder that it collapsed like till last November, just last November, and not even before. but it was not really working on any of the challenges, you can say, for the last 1.5 years.
Yes.
And the economic problems we have, they are mainly based on wrong political decisions, you can say.
Okay.
And one, for example, is the high energy costs.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So we have compared in the global comparison very high energy costs, and this is due to political reasons. For example, we had several of the most modern nuclear power plants.
Yes.
And even after the war in Ukraine started and there was no cheap gas from Russia anymore, the government decided to switch off these nuclear power plants. It looks insane from the outside, and it's also insane from the inside, I have to admit. And another decision or another wrong policy I can mention here is the German social system.
Mm-hmm.
The German social system is so advanced at this point that for many people it doesn't make sense to work anymore. And of course, in order to pay this high amount of money into the social system, people pay a lot of tax.
Okay.
So we have high energy costs, we have very high taxation, so high labor costs, and at the same time, we have very low incentives to work for people.
Mm-hmm.
And this obviously is not a good mixture. So Germany, the last 3 years, I have to say, and I'm really sad about that, they are, from the Indian perspective, a role model, how not to do it.
Yeah.
So actually, it shows us what can happen if a society is too wealthy and starts with political experiments. And what we are facing right now are the results of political experiments which went ethically wrong.
Right. So I'm glad you put it, like that. Jan, if I may come to, there are high energy prices, of course. There's an aging workforce. There's also something called the debt brake, which has also been put in place by the Merkel government in 2009, if I'm not wrong. But at the heart of all this, Jan, I feel, is that the slump is structural. Why do you think Germany is so resistant to change?
I think we'll need a few segments, a few parts for this show. If I'm to fully answer that question, why is Germany so resistant to change? I think there are many factors. I think demography definitely plays a role in that. But as Dr. Haack mentioned, Germany's been successful for a very, very long time at many levels. And the old saying, if it works, don't change it. If it's not broken, don't fix it. But at the same time, that creates also a certain degree of complacency. And I think that fits into what he's saying as well to a certain degree. But I think what we're seeing as well, not just the change, is that Germany's post-war history, especially I would say the post-Cold War history, is very much intertwined and nearly symbiotic to what the EU is doing. And in this sense, the crises at the EU level are also Germany's crises. And over the last 5 years, what we've seen is that the EU's three major dependencies, whether it's on defense with the United States, on energy with Russia, and on the economy with China, have been exposed. And adapting to to try break away simultaneously from three different dependencies and managing different crises creates a situation where suddenly each country has to adapt. And in Germany, with the political system, that becomes even more complicated. So you're constantly in trying to negotiate coalitions, even if it's the so-called Große Koalition, if the classic parties of the SPD and the CDU working together, which was the core, I would say, of the Merkel years. You had a certain stability, but when you're confronted with so much change at once, while internally having to compromise constantly, it creates a perfect situation where a lot of the internal and external factors become very problematic, create problems, difficulties to adapt to change. and then at the same time amplify every small failure. And I think this conflation is really what is hampering Germany right now, and has hampered it. Even if we go beyond, I guess if we go back to 2008, the constant need to adapt, what happens at the EU level, and how that internally affects Germany.
Right. Yeah. So I think there's a general consensus about the fact that yes, there has been structural economic problems, but ever since the war in Ukraine started, and I mean even before that, the traffic light coalition came into power, promising a few things, that they will have a China strategy, that they will have a national security strategy, and we did see that they delivered. But both those documents were very, very watered down, and particularly talking about China, because I think this is something that we need to understand a little better here. So I would first ask you this, Adrian, is that is Germany even serious about de-risking from China, or do we only hear it at the level of semantics, and that's where the Zeitenwende ends when it comes to de-risking from China?
There's a willingness to de-risk,
but is there a capacity?
And there is also a capacity, but the issue we have is there is, let's say, there is an existing business model. So if I was recently talking with a manager of a big German car brand, and he said, what we sell in India per year is what we sell in China in 5 days. So and we talk about approximately the same amount of people living in those countries, even a little bit more in India, and it is very obvious that with the rise of Chinese economy, they were consuming a lot of goods from Europe, but especially from Germany. And on the one hand, consumer goods, like we talk about cars, watches, toothpaste or whatever, but also about engineering and machinery in a big scale. So of course, you have a lot of companies which are so focused on China. For them, it's really hard to de-risk, because China would leave a tremendous vacuum, and there are actually hardly any other markets to fill that vacuum.
Okay.
And this is, of course, part of the truth. So on one hand, you can have a political will, but economic-wise, it is, of course, just about the actual numbers. And China is still today a huge market, not only for Europe, but also for any other bigger economy in the world.
But there is also another factor which is sometimes hidden here, which is that in Germany's very complicated relationship with China, I mean, all countries have a complicated trade relationship with China, India being one as well. But coming back to Germany, what role do you think that when the Trump administration had come the first time and they put a certain kind of a trade war approach towards China, and then Germany had to fall in line and also put tech export restrictions, etc. How do you think that factor has played in? And now that Trump is back again, and perhaps that rhetoric is going to be high again, and Germany and the larger Europe is going to be forced to tend to their security, etc. How is this going to play out?
I mean, Trump 1 was maybe a little bit, I don't want to call it the awakening, but he sensified Europeans about that China issue. But in fact, the implications were rather low.
Okay.
And now we will see how Trump 2 will play out, but this is just a personal impression from an outsider. I have the impression he's way better prepared the second time than he was the first time. So many of the ideas he had, which were rhetoric at the first administration, might become actual policy in the second term. And to be honest, I don't know if in Europe we are prepared for that.
Right. So you think that Europe is not really as Trump-proofed as it should be, frankly. And now with that, coming to Jan, if you remember, one of the things that really caught everybody's attention in India when the Ukraine war had started was that Olaf Scholz, Chancellor, he came up with two things. One, of course, is the much touted Zeitenwende, and of course, we are still trying to understand what it is. But the second thing was about spending €100 billion modernization, defense modernization plan. Jan, do you see that Germany has been able to live up to that promise? Because as far as I know, not even a single euro has really been raised out of that $100 billion. or 100 billion euros. Yes. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it hasn't been able. I mean, it's been very difficult. But the first thing we have to say about the 100 billion euros has been that it's actually the minimum that the Bundeswehr needed to modernize to modern standards. Right. That's a number that was going on through the defense ministry for years. That was considered to be the absolute minimum to bring the Bundeswehr up to standard. So it wasn't an additional. It wasn't suddenly freeing huge amounts of money. It was also done in a context where, and that we saw in following months, that in a time where the budget restrictions were quite different because of the pandemic. The break on the debt was different, trying to free up some money that was very different. But the real issue became about the supply chain, right? Because the German industry wasn't immediately in a position to both, in terms of bureaucracy, react to the political decision, but at the same time for suppliers to say, okay, yeah, we can fulfill that contract. That's not a problem. So the entire supply chain, the entire process became very complicated. At the same time, internal issues. So, for example, that the Ministry of Defense wasn't properly managed for about 2 years under Kirsten Lambrecht, the former minister at the time. She was very much dependent on the policies dictated by the chancellery. Once Boris Pistorius came in, he gave really a new jolt into that policy, became more aggressive. Some of the divisions between the foreign ministry under the Green Party and Annalena Baerbock, who's more hawkish in her attitudes and trying to push that, we're also in conflict with what the SPD wanted. So all these things, yeah, the Zeitenwende was I guess in post-Cold War history, a very important speech, and it was a great speech, but it was a speech, and it has yet to really translate into policy. And obviously, the coalition issues have hampered that. And even that's not to say that Germany hasn't. I mean, Germany remains Europe's biggest supporter for Ukraine. They're the biggest supplier, at least. They've done a lot, but it's always been really difficult. It's always been the grind to come with that. Whereas other countries were suddenly willing to, oh no, we can actually provide this, we can do that. And so, all in all, that Zeitenwende was, I guess, in terms of symbolic, really important. But yeah, in terms of raw application, raw implementation, it's still difficult. We'll see. I guess under the next government, if there's a willingness to really go forth and push and be more aggressive with that policy. But I think that's the fact that it's so linked to the situation in Ukraine. If there is a peace deal at some point in Ukraine, then will the willingness for change still be there? I think the issue is then, will Europe's defense policy and Germany's defense policy and the Zeitenwende be linked then to producing leverage towards the Trump administration? So this is what brings us, I guess, to the topic of Greenland and other places. So there are so many factors that could influence how the defense policy is being changed. But the main question will be, what's the main driver if it's no longer Ukraine?
Fine. So, but that again, does it not come back, make us come back to the same thing, which is that what do you think is the role of the debt break, and why do you think that the Germans are not willing to sort of, loosen it up a little bit? Because I think also for the viewers, one must understand that both the two major economies and the big powers in Europe are undergoing economic crisis. France for its own reasons, and Germany for its own reasons. But just to give a little bit of perspective, what happens? The problem with France is overspending, and the problem with Germany is that it cannot spend because there are very stringent debt breaks. Do you think with the new government that is expected to come, what really is going to be that major economic change that everybody wants? Because I was just reading some of the statements that Friedrich Merz made, who was one of the contenders for the chancellorship, and he said that economic policy is also 50% psychology. That doesn't really sound like a very interesting financial plan. What is going to be the financial plan?
So it's good that you frame it that way. So the debt break, I have to defend it really.
Okay.
Because the financial plan of the current government is throwing money at problems.
Okay.
Which is very easy if it's other people's money. So all that socialists know about money is that they need it from someone.
Right.
And if there wouldn't have been a debt break, they would have even wasted more money than they did already. And why did the coalition collapse?
Yeah.
The Minister for Finance, who was a liberal, was asked to break the debt brake.
Yeah.
So the Chancellor wanted to have more money from the banks, which obviously the taxpayer have to pay back at some point. And he said, I will not do that. I will rather leave this government right now instead of committing this sin.
Okay.
So actually, no problem is solved by wasting more money. It just gives you more time.
Okay.
And this is, I think, what we have to learn. It is not substantial. It is not substantial. So it is also in private life not substantial, right? I mean, if you have a certain habit of consuming goods, you can do this with your credit card for a while, but at some point you have to pay it back.
Okay.
And this can obviously not be the policy for the third biggest economy in the world, just to borrow money from the banks.
Okay.
And therefore, it's, from my perspective, completely right to not change this policy.
So you think this is an important fiscal safety guard?
It is a safeguard, and also look back at the Euro crisis.
Okay.
Why was Germany not suffering like many other states? Because they had very stable financial situation.
Okay.
And Germany became a harbor also for foreign investment. Because foreign money is well aware that you have a safe harbor if you invest in Germany. And all these financial experiments, they will not lead to a more stable environment. And you mentioned France. Did it help France? And anyhow, did it help Greece? Yeah. So they are not in better shape. They just have bigger debt at this moment.
Yeah. All right. So, but then that's the position on the debt brake. But what really is the economic solution to what is happening? Is it like corporate tax cuts?
Corporate tax cuts, cheaper energy prices, less taxation of labor, and a complete reform of the welfare system. I just give you one example. Imagine I'm a father of two, and my wife doesn't work. If I would live on social welfare, I would get money for us as adults as well as for the kids, plus the state would pay the rent. So in average, because rent differs all over Germany, in average, if you calculate and compare it with a father who goes to work for his family, this person needs to earn approximately 3,320 euros, which is more or less $1, which is it's a decent salary, because after tax, both families will have the same money in their pocket. And there are certainly a lot of jobs where you earn less. And if those people tell me, why should I wake up in the morning and go to work? I have to say I don't have an answer for you. And you can experience that yourself. Go to Germany by plane and see how long you wait for your luggage. Because all these jobs, getting the luggage out of the plane, why should anyone do it? Yeah? And this is actually the main problem we have. We have a huge amount of people who are able to work. I don't think of people, don't talk of people who have health reasons or other reasons why they cannot work. We have a huge amount of people who would be able to work, but it makes economically no sense for them.
So there are no incentives for them to work.
I cannot be mean at them. I mean, why should you wake up in the morning, go out in the cold and pack baggage out of the plane at the airport if someone who stays in bed gets the same money? And this is of course this is 50% psychology, you said, but in this regard, psychology has a very practical outcome.
Okay. No, I mean, I am getting a sense of just how difficult it is to bring these changes on the ground. But Jan, now if we take it more to the security realm, because I think we all understand that there are certain deeper economic problems which will require deeper reforms, like you said, and you mentioned a few. But then talking about Ukraine security. From India's perspective, often it looks as if that there's this cluster of world's most advanced economies, right? World's most advanced and state-of-the-art defense industries that are not able to take care of their own security. How on earth are they going to double down on preserving a rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific, or perhaps doing something else for other countries emerging as security actors? Let's first talk about Germany's attitude to European security and to Ukraine. I mean, where do you think this is going?
Well, I think what we're seeing is certainly a change. I mentioned earlier the three crises, and one of them that was provoked by the first Trump administration was indeed the idea of withdrawing U.S. troops from the European continent. That was obviously before the expansion of the invasion, or the increase in scale of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And there was already a huge uproar. Suddenly, Europe had to suddenly think about providing its own security. That's something, obviously, that the French have been discussing for a very long time. The famous quote by Emmanuel Macron saying, "Yeah, well, NATO's brain dead. Europe needs to find its own way." But at the same time, we're talking about, especially at the EU level, we're talking about 28 countries with very different perspectives, very different views of threat dynamics, risk analysis. The Eastern European countries have been harping for years. Well, we need to prepare for Russia. We need to prepare for Russia. Their calls weren't heeded. That created the situation. Well, okay, we have the invasion of Ukraine. Europe needed to react to it. So there's a lot of different interests, different assessments that came into play with this. And Germany's always been a foot in and a foot out. And that's always been, again, the idea of having your cake and eating it too, where they don't want to appear to be belligerent, for obvious historical reasons. But at the same time, their role in Europe, has grown. I always joke at being a foreigner in Germany, that I can get away saying certain things that others can't. But I used to say, Germany is the strongest country in Europe. People will say, no, you're not allowed to say this. So why not? It's the fact. It's the strongest economy. If there's a crisis going on, people turn to Germany for leadership to see what's going on. And it's a role that, for all its responsibilities, that Germany is being very unwilling to assume and take on, and that's created, obviously, some issues and hindrances at Europe's defense policy. And in this sense, you are having a more forceful France, trying to be more assertive, that also has interest in the Indo-Pacific and other regions, and then Germany trying to maintain that balance of saying, well, I'm the good cop and we're not going to be that bad, in an era where actors are becoming more, at least assertive, if not belligerent. And in this sense, it's creating these discrepancies. Forced into managing a crisis, especially the one regarding the Ukraine war, is this: you're suddenly required to play catch up. Right, and in that sense, that means the resources aren't available. As I mentioned before, the supply chain isn't ready, and you're having to manage this with 28 countries, because certain key components of the defense industry will be produced in Italy, another part in Germany, another part in Spain, another part in France, with varying criteria, and bringing all of that together to respond to a crisis situation, that's very difficult. So yes, Europe can manage this, but they've been passive for so long, they've been complacent for so long, that you can't possibly catch up 30 years of being passive on security and defense policy in the span of two or 5 years. We're talking probably more 10 years, and then again, that will be a difficult 10 years.
Right. I mean, it's again kind of reflecting this entire criticism that often is done about Europe not able to wake up from its holiday from history, But yes, it does take me to this question of what about the Franco-German engine that fuels Europe and European Union? Because what are your thoughts? Not many people perhaps know that despite all this apparent unwillingness to really go solo in supporting Ukraine, Germany has been the biggest supporter to Ukraine as far as military assistance is concerned. In fact, only this year, the plan earlier was to support, to give about 8 billion worth of euros to Ukraine. Then it was slashed by 50%, and then they said 4 billion. And now then there was an additional, so to say, support of 3 billion. And as far as I understand, the CDU have been more pro-Ukraine generally. So when the CDU now, I mean, it looks as if that they will be forming the next government. What do you think is the future of Ukraine going from that perspective? And not just Ukraine, but also European security, because it's not just about supporting Ukraine, it is also about doubling down on meeting the 2% at least of the NATO commitment. And now under Trump, he's pushing for 5%. Where do you think this is going? Yeah.
So true, but you claimed it quite well. The current government was actually just doing what the opposition wanted with 6 until 8 weeks delay.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
It was repeating when it comes to different weapon systems, but actually most likely after the elections we will have a government which is very supportive on Ukraine, but at the same time very much keen to act within the frameworks of our allies, which is US on the one hand, but also France and the other Europeans. Let's not forget the Eastern Europeans,
especially
like
Poland.
Poland. And when it comes to European security, we have to distinguish a little bit.
Okay.
Because EU is not in danger. I mean, if you see the performance of the so-called second strongest army in the world against the poorest country of Europe for the last 3 years, they will not survive against Poland alone for 1 week. So the risk that the Russian forces cross the German border is for the German citizens very low.
Okay.
And therefore you have to see, since the end of the Cold War, the German people are more willing to invest in everything but security, because they say there is no threat. It's a waste of our taxpayers' money. Let's invest in universities. Let's invest in highways, etc. Now we have a new situation, and you ask how it will go on with Ukraine. But the more important question, how it will go on with Russia.
Yeah.
Because Russia is the problem. We don't have a problem with Ukraine. So Ukraine is not a threat for Europe at all. And if we look at Russia, it's, from my perspective, predictable.
Okay.
Even if the war will end tomorrow, what's the situation in Russia? You have more than 1 million Russians dead or wounded. You have widows. You have disabled people coming from the war, and they didn't have achieved a lot.
Okay.
So whoever is ruling Russia, it doesn't matter if it's Putin or anyone else, this person cannot set up the narrative. This all happened in the fight against the poorest country in Europe, 5 times smaller than we are.
Yeah.
The narrative they need to rule Russia for the next 1 or 2 decades is, we were fighting NATO.
Yeah.
And therefore, there will be a Russian threat for us, at least for the next 2 decades, which will lead to the result that we have to invest in our defense.
Okay.
And this will be a constant struggle in society among those who say we have to invest in order to face that risk, and those who are more willing to invest elsewhere and will say, argument that the risk is rather low.
Okay.
So this, it's predictable, and Jan mentioned it, 1 foot out, 1 foot in. This is something we can kind of expect for the future. So in many electoral campaigns in the future, we will have that topic, that some want to invest more in security, some want to invest less.
And do you think the CDU coming to power, and I'm coming to Jan with something important, but then just to add to that, do you think the CDU coming to power will finally remove the hesitation of sending the Taurus missiles to Ukraine, or do you think that is still a no-go?
I mean, the opposition leader made it quite clear. He said we have to give the choice to Vladimir Putin. So his propose was, we tell very clearly, if you continue bombing hospitals, we will send the Taurus missile. If you behave not in that manner, you can avoid that. And this is actually the only language Putin understands. In the past, we tried to sanction him. And let's be honest, it started in 2014. I mean, the lesson learned from him is I can do whatever I want. All they do is sanction me.
So, on the one hand, of course, we see that inside Europe, because of Russia's war in Ukraine and because of all the sanctions that have been put on Russia and the way that has led to higher energy prices, etc., it has also led to the rise of the far right. Okay, even we have seen that, year after year, the far right has been doing well in so many countries in Europe, and right now AFD is a force to reckon with. Especially when it comes to Germany. You do see that after Donald Trump coming, Elon Musk has shown a kind of an endorsement of the AFD, but that is very difficult for the European project because by definition the far right parties are Eurosceptic. Where do you see this as going, Jan?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, but I think we have to understand the dynamics of the far right, whether in Europe or in North America, and I'm including Canada in this because there is an emerging far right there as well. From independently from the situation in Ukraine, in this case, I think the Russia's actions going back, let's say 20 years or 15 years now, more or less, have catalyzed everything. What social media, whether it's figures like Trump or Musk or Steve Bannon and Breitbart and whatever else, they're all catalysts for something that's been there for a very long time. And I'll say, we're living in the age of fear. Right, Eric Hobsbawm, the historian, had this wonderful series of books: "The Age of Revolution," "The Age of Industry," "Age of Empire," and "Age of Extremes." And we now live in the age of fear, where it's been very easy for politicians, especially in countries where mainstream parties have stagnated in terms of support over the last 20, 25, nearly 30 years. And this has created a situation where tapping into the programs of the far right has been conducive because there's an electorate. I remember, nearly 15 or almost 20 years ago, the election, the French election, presidential election, 2007, Ségolène Royal was actually sort of denounced by the then Front National, the Rassemblement National, where they were saying, hey, she's stealing from our ideas. So you're having a far-right party complaining about a left-wing party stealing their ideas. In 2013, the NPD, the neo-Nazi party in Germany, was complaining to the AfD about the AfD stealing their ideas. And then to another extent, in terms of normalization of that discourse, you have unfortunately, someone like Friedrich Merz, who in 2019, in June, says, we need to tap into, the security vote in Germany. We need to get the soldiers and the police officers to vote for us again. And this was because they were drifting to the AfD. And so that's a dynamic growing there that's very different. But the common denominator, regardless of the country, is that there's a political tendency for more than 2 decades right now to use the short-term gains in which fear and insecurity play a major role, while dismissing the long-term consequences. And now we're starting to reap the long-term consequences of creating a situation where people feel insecure, where people feel they need a more radical decision-making process, a more radical representation of their interests. And this is where parties like the AfD and the Rassemblement National and other parties, or Geert Wilders in Holland, or Giorgia Meloni in Italy, gain their support because there's a frustration, because there's an anger, but that anger is also catalyzed by so many factors, including tapping into that well that is, in fact, in the end, a poisoned well.
Right. Oh, well, that's the correct way of putting it, because of course, at the end, it is basically showing the frustration that people feel on the ground with respect to long processes, over-regulation, a rigid bureaucracy, things are changing, and then somebody comes and says, I'm going to solve your problems, and then people start believing that. Very quickly, now we have to definitely talk about India and Indo-Pacific, because one of the things that we have seen, couple of things from India's perspective, not only is Germany India's largest trading partner in Europe, I think the cumulative trade is about 26-30 billion worth of dollars. Also, there is a huge potential to grow that, and I think we have different mechanisms to sort of work on that. But more than that has been the German engagement of Indo-Pacific after the Indo-Pacific strategy was published, right? I think in 2021. And then the war in Ukraine started, and then we saw a kind of a doubling down in many ways, because there were capabilities that the German side promised for deploying. So there was a frigate that for the first time came and docked, not only in other countries in the ASEAN like Singapore, etc., but also in India. This was just before the war had started, and then of course it repeated again. There's been more multinational exercises, etc. But what has really caught my attention and everybody's attention, frankly, has been the India in Focus document, which sounds too good to be true. My question to you is, where do you think Germany will have the bandwidth, the economic resources to modernize itself, look after its economic problems, also support Ukraine and its own security, and then also deploy its assets and capabilities for the Indo-Pacific? That just sounds too good to be true. Where do you think I mean, I would request you to put some realism there. What should we expect here in India?
It's a win-win situation.
Okay.
I mean, there is a constant large-scale maritime deployment of the German Navy in the Indo-Pacific. This is not realistic. Germany will be one out of several European nations which will cooperate in that maritime region, and Germany will be able to constantly exercise or participate in exercises like Taram Chakti recently happened in Zulu Air Base. I think where we have a common interest in the security front is defense cooperation. And Germany in the past was very restrictive on that topic, extremely restrictive, one can say. And this document is also, you mentioned the document, it is also more or less already the policy of the current opposition, which is most likely to come into power. So we will have a new German government which is way more open on security cooperations in the industry sector. And look at the other hand on India. India wants to be self-reliant and therefore diversify. And therefore, and let's also mention the biggest supplier of India has struggled to supply right now. So there was air defense system. There were 2 bigger orders of helicopters which didn't happen. And this will most likely continue because the Russians need their stuff themselves.
Yeah, but if the war ends, then what is the pressure then?
I mean, if you are satisfied with the performance of Russian weapons on the battlefield, you can continue giving them to your soldiers. But I think the leadership in India has some kind of approach to diversify. There's not only Germany, there's more of France, Israel, and the US as well. And you have high cost technological products you can get in Germany, and you have production make in India. You have production capacity in India, and just there are negotiations about India ordering 6 submarines from a German company.
By the way, just to clarify that India's largest strategic partnership model for conventional submarines, which have the AIP technology or air independent propulsion technology, has been backed by ThyssenKrupp, which is a German firm, and govt, which is its Indian partner. So that largest strategic partnership model for that Indian MOD has chosen Germany. So that's been a lot of trust which has been entrusted in Germany.
So Indian sailors will have the most advanced submarine technologies. Indian workers can make a living on that shipyard. German company will provide technology and also earn on it. So it's a win-win for everyone. And I would say this defense partnership, this industrial cooperation, they are really the key.
Right.
And also look at it from a bigger perspective. I mean, you mentioned on Ukraine. Mm. Europe needed a big amount, for example, of ammunition for a short time. And once the war will end, the capacities will not be needed anymore. Same is with any other army in the world. You modernize a certain system, and afterwards you have it modernized for several decades. What do you do with the defense capacity? And what we do right now, we have a market with clients and providers. It would be way more efficient if global defense industry is more interlinked, more interdependent. Okay. Because why can on this Indian shipyard, why can ThyssenKrupp only build their submarines for the Indian Navy in the future? If there is a country which has a demand and is friends with India as well as with Germany, you have production capacity there, and this is happening in Europe already. Mm-hmm. You have many co-productions. Just yesterday, Italy announced that they will buy 330 new battle tanks and more than 1,000 infantry fighting vehicles, and it will be a German-Italian co-production. Yes. And these are role models where both sides can benefit.
So far we have this kind of an arrangement mostly with France, where we are talking, we have a defense industrial roadmap that talks about co-development, co-production, and also co-export perhaps. But so far, frankly, the real success stories have been with Russia, with BrahMos. So do you foresee that this kind of a so to say, production and transfer of technology can be achieved also between India and Germany and and be taken to an extent where you start exporting to third countries? Is that what you were trying to suggest earlier? Do you see that India and Germany can go in that direction?
Yes, obviously. First of all, India has to think about India, right?
Right.
So first of all, India has to modernize, diversify its own troops, and India is facing risks. So you have to supply yourself first of all.
Yeah.
But furthermore, India is at the same time trying to grow the manufacturing sector, and India can be a hub for defense manufacturing, also for third countries. Again, Russia was the second biggest arms supplier in the world. But if you look at the low price segment, Russia really didn't have a lot of competitors. Mm-hmm. The only competitor in the low price segment was China. So who's now going to take this role globally?
Okay.
It's most likely not Germany or the US with their high production costs. And so Italy is also buying a new German air defense tank, $59 billion per unit.
Okay.
You can imagine how many customers in the developing world are willing to pay such prices. So it is obvious that there is a huge market where the biggest supplier is shrinking.
Yeah.
So and in many other sectors, India can have a great industrial future. I see.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at, let's take another example, the car manufacturing. There are 3.5 million new cars entering India's roads every year.
Yeah.
That's really a lot. And right now we are talking about a low price segment. It's mostly Suzuki is Maruti is dominating the market. But the Indian middle class will rise. They will have a demand on more advanced products. And if you look at any of your neighbor countries where there's also a middle class rising, do they have a car industry? I mean, where do people in Bangladesh will buy cars in the future? Why does it have to be China? Yeah, and therefore I think in India, I would personally say the next 10 years down the line, India will be one of the most important players economically and also politically.
Right.
And I would say it is in the favor of the world if we, and by we I mean Europe as one, US and India, are able to build kind of a triangle where we are able to agree on the general framework, or where we have a common sense of the big question.
Right.
Because China is not waiting for us. And I also see that if you look at the US and Donald Trump, the times when only Europe was able to let's say, have a common ground with the US is maybe over. Maybe it needs another player in order to have a certain balance. And India, at that regard, is internally extremely stable, as we see it. We have now the government for 11 years or something, ruling with an absolute majority and having a very constant policy approach. The agenda doesn't really change during that time. So I think this is really the India's time, you can say.
Well, yes. I mean, in my own writings, I've called it India's truly intersectional global movement, and the idea for India is to try and capitalize as much as possible on that. So, yes, I mean, I'm with you on that. However, I still have my doubts on whether we are really being able to make use of the China plus one diversification, as the investments are not really coming to India, and that is a lot of homework that the Indian side has to do. But very quickly, I think that has been, a wonderful.
Sorry for the long answer.
Not at all. The purpose of the worldview is actually to dive deep into these things which are not able to get, the right kind of analyses. But Jan, if I come and ask you about certain recommendations that you would like to suggest to the viewers, to researchers, because when it comes to understanding Germany, the change, the bottlenecks, the larger European security, often people are going to Google, or people are going and checking random material. What would you suggest?
Well, definitely the various German think tanks, including the Adenauer Stiftung, so the CAS, have produced good papers along there. I think the Körber Stiftung, Bertelsmann, have produced good papers on that topic. And I think the papers are probably more relevant than the books in that sense, because the dynamics in Germany are so the politics are so dynamic that getting a proper understanding of how things can go is probably better to have the paper. That said, I think history books about Germany's post-Cold War, reading about, for example, I think it's important to understand for viewers the coalition dynamics in Germany. Yes, I think we're all assuming that the CDU will be the main party elected at the next election, but they're going to have a coalition partner regardless, and they might have coalition partners. And I think just understanding books on Germany's political coalition dynamics will be very important to understand how policy is dictated, because it's never just about one party. It's about finding a compromise, which will then be translated into policy. And that policy becomes really difficult to apply depending on the ministry, which is directed by a member of a specific party. So I think those, if viewers look for more information, material along those lines should be very helpful.
Thank you, Jan, for that. Dr. Haack, what would be your recommendation?
I mean, the big names in the think tank world, they are mentioned, but let me just very quickly mention one misunderstanding I want to avoid for our Indian audience. We talk a lot about migration and the rise of the far right. It's only about migration, asylum migration from the Middle East and Africa, or West Asia, as we say here.
The MENA region, the Middle East, North Africa region, yeah.
It's about this illegal migration. It's not about migrants at all. Indians are already the biggest foreign group on universities, and there are many Indians who go to work for Germany to try to make a living. They are all welcome. If you sometimes read it's about migration, this is, let's say, in shortening the truth. It's only about illegal migration. You are not meant even the far right party does differentiate, and the conservatives who are most likely in power and want to reduce illegal migration, they don't talk about Indian students or Indian coming for work about that regard. So you are still very welcome.
No, I'm sure that's been the consistent pitch. But with that, I think that's all we had to discuss today. You would agree that this was quite a lengthy, analytical, and an extremely enriching discussion that went into the length and depths of what is really Germany's different challenges. What do we expect from the new government, which should be there soon? And as Jan said, not just with one coalition partner, but maybe more coalition partners that only time can tell. And then what is in it for the longer haul when it comes to Germany-India relations and its commitments to Indo-Pacific. So thank you, both of you. It was wonderful having Jan, you from Berlin, and Dr. Haack, you here in New Delhi. Thank you so much.
That was a wonderful discussion. The German Zeitenwende remains far from implementation. The economic downturn is structural, and therefore its solutions must also be structural. Key takeaways from our discussion today include the following. Economically, Germany's debt brake is supposed to act as a safeguard against excessive spending, but the real issue lies in its social welfare model, which kind of disincentivizes work. Chronic underspending and a lack of competitiveness continues to hinder growth, and this has been a factor for many, many years. Politically, if the CDU or the Christian Democrats forms the next government, and which looks likely, they may push for corporate tax cuts while simultaneously needing to allocate funds for domestic spending, for Ukraine, and their ambitions in the Indo-Pacific. Now, whether they can balance these priorities remains an open question. A CDU-led government, likely in coalition with other parties or partners, would be more committed to bolstering both Germany's own security and Ukraine's defense. Now, from an Indian perspective, institutional frameworks for collaboration are robust and geopolitical convergence is at its peak. A major catalyst for strategic cooperation could be the German defense industry, which is showing a newfound flexibility and resilience in working with India, marking a clear break from its traditionally rigid approach. However, the real test lies in whether the Franco-German engine that powers the European project can overcome its holiday from history mindset and confront geopolitical realities with renewed urgency. That was all for today. You were watching The Print Worldview with Swasti, and I will be back to discuss other geopolitical issues that warrant detailed analyses. Until then, stay tuned.